Hey, it's Peter with RL Property Management. Hey, I'm going to answer one of the most common questions that we get here at RL Property Management, which is how do you set the rent at an investment property or a rental home? Sometimes people will say, what's the process you use for picking the rent, or do I get to choose the rent amount? Sometimes they may ask, what rent should I charge for my rental property? And since it's one of the most common questions that we get, I'd like to take some time and really answer that in detail for you here today. And in the process of doing that, I'm going to be sharing with you a few things. One of them is a tool that we use when we're researching and selecting and asking rent for a property that we're going to list for rent. And a few of the other things I'm going to be sharing with you is a little bit about the philosophy of how we set market rents, or how we set asking rents, I should say, and what's the difference between the market rent and the asking rent. It's actually a very in-depth question that's very relevant to anyone who's interested in renting out their home or purchasing investment property, because the rent is usually your only source of income. So it's important that you understand all the details involved with setting the asking rent or evaluating the market rent at a property that you own or you're thinking about purchasing. So let's jump right into it. The first point I want to make is that it's actually the market that sets the rent at a piece of property. So some people have this idea that they can select a price for the rent the way you might select a price for a piece of artwork that you made. You just set the price and that's what it is. Well, not really. In the world of rental real estate, the market actually sets the rent. Okay, so the marketplace, meaning the group of buyers or renters that are searching for a place to live, they're the ones in conjunction with the other available listings that actually set the price. So you can think of it more like eBay, or a good analogy is also a home sale. You can set the listing price at a home you'd like to sell. That doesn't mean you're going to get that price. It just means this is what I'd like to get. The market will actually tell you what it's worth in the form of offers and negotiations. Okay, so that's an important thing to understand. We don't set the rent. You don't set the rent. The tenant doesn't even set the rent. It's the marketplace together that will come and sort of work it out such that the property will end up renting for a certain price. The next thing I want to mention is that you can affect the outcome by selecting the asking rent. Okay, so we don't have control of the market rent, but we do have control over the asking rent. So when we go to list a piece of property for rent, we can select the dollar amount that we're advertising the property at. And that dollar amount, whether it's higher or lower, will affect the outcome for you as the owner of the property. And we put together a nice graphic that really, I think, demonstrates this quite well. I'll hold this up. Hopefully you can get a good view of that. So across the bottom here is the expected time to lease the property. And then along the vertical axis is the asking rental rate. Okay, so if you have a very low asking rental rate, you can see here that your expected time to lease the property is much faster. In other words, you're going to lease it quickly, and that makes intuitive sense to most people. Sorry about that. In the middle here, if you have an asking rent that's sort of in the middle, then your expected time to lease the property is going to be about average. And naturally, if you're asking above the market rent, your expected time to lease the property is longer. So you can get a sense of where you are relative to the market rent by how long it's taking to move that piece of property. If you're getting a lot of interest, you're getting a lot of applications, that probably means that you're right at the market rent or even a little bit below it. On the other hand, if you have the property listed and you're not really getting any interest, no one's really calling and asking to see it, that probably means that the market has determined that your asking rent is a little bit too high. There's some other details here I want to mention when it comes to this market rent. We have a nice graphic here. So if you're asking above the market rent for a piece of rental property, here's the result in our experience renting out probably close to 1,000 units by this point. The property's going to take longer. We mentioned that. You're also going to get fewer potential tenants and less desirable tenants. Now, why is that? Some people have this idea that if you set the price above or kind of on the higher end, well, then you're only going to get people who can afford it, and you're naturally going to select for people who are doing better financially and in a better position. Well, actually, the opposite is true. The fact is that people who are doing well financially, they have a good credit score, they have stable income, and they have a good rental history. Those are folks like you and me. They really have a sense for value. They don't want to overpay for something. They're well qualified and they know it. And so they're really going to be looking for a nice piece of property at a great price. And they're going to be almost like bargain hunters. They're going to shop around. On the other hand, folks who are not well qualified, maybe they have an eviction in their history, maybe they're jumping from job to job, maybe they don't have much in savings, or they have some sort of criminal problem in their past, they know that they're not a good tenant and that landlords are going to be reluctant to lease to them. And for that reason, they're much more willing to pay above the market rent. They're pretty much going to take whatever they can get, and if they have to pay an extra $100 or $200 a month in order to be approved and actually live somewhere, then they're going to do it. So you actually will have the effect of attracting some of those folks if you're setting the market rent well above, if you're setting the asking rent well above the market rent. If you price it right at the market rent, you're going to have an average time to lease, as we discussed in that graphic, and you're going to have average potential tenant options. On the other hand, if you set the rent slightly below the market rent, you're going to see that the property typically leases faster, you're going to have more potential tenant options, and you're going to have more desirable tenants applying. That was what I was referring to earlier. Folks who are going to be applying at or below market rents, those are the people that you really want in your property. There's another factor to consider when you're setting the asking rent, which is vacancy. So vacancy is almost like the silent killer of real estate returns. It may not seem like a big deal if a home or a unit sits vacant for an extra few days or a week or two, but it is when you look at the total return on investment. Your returns are really going to be pretty tight. There's not a lot of wiggle room there. There's not a lot of extra money at the end of the year. And so just a few weeks could kind of make the difference between profiting on your real estate investment and just breaking even. And so you need to bear that in mind when you're setting the market rent, because if you set it too high, you kind of shoot for the moon and the property ends up sitting vacant for an extra month, then all that money, even if you do achieve the rental rate that you set out to get, you've lost a month. So if the property was running for $1,500, you've lost $1,500, and if you were trying to get an extra $50 a month, well, that would have only been $600 across the whole year, and you just lost $1,500. So we find that your overall returns are maximized by being fairly aggressive with the asking rent, getting good qualified tenants in there, and moving the property along quickly, getting someone to move in relatively fast. The last thing I'll talk about is the tools that we use when setting the asking rent or when we're asked to evaluate a property to determine what the market rent might be. We use the traditional online tools that most people are probably using. So we're using Zillow, we're using Craigslist to get a feel for the marketplace and check out the comparable units that are listed for sale. And then we use a few other things too that I don't think a lot of people know about. One of them is the Trulia heat map. So if you go on Trulia, I'll include a link in the description. They actually have a rental heat map that you can use, so you can zoom into your part of the city and see it's displayed in like a price per bedroom. And so you can get a sense for what the price per bedroom is in that area in terms of rent. And then I also lately have been checking out Rentometer or rentometer.com. I think it's free for just casual use. You can plug an address in there and it will kind of pull up recently rented units in the neighborhood and give you an idea of how much the rent is probably going to be. So we use those tools here at RL Property Management in addition to using our internal database of all the properties that we manage, which is several hundred throughout the Columbus area. So we, more often than not, have recently rented a property nearby, and so we kind of have a feel for what the tenants are willing to pay in that area. So I hope you find all that information useful when you're thinking about setting the asking rent at your piece of rental property, and that you have a better understanding of how we would think about it if you asked us to evaluate the rent at a piece of property that you own or that you're thinking about purchasing. If you have any questions, feel free to get in touch and we'll definitely try and help you out. Thanks.